So, hello everyone. Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for the little delay in beginning this event. I'm Dr. Véronique Ropion, Strategic Project Director at Pharmalis, and I have the pleasure to be your host today. So thank you to all for joining us for this webinar on implementation research, which is a much debated topic. So this webinar is a CREDO event that was organized and institutionally sponsored by Pharmalis Limited. I will give the floor in a few seconds to Marieme, who is the founder and the CEO of Pharmalis and PACE, and who set up CREDO as a non-for-profit institution. So Marieme will open the webinar and give you a bit of a background. Before, I would like to share a few organizational details. So your micros will be muted during the whole webinar and your cameras will be off. After each lecture, a questions and answer session will be open, and you are invited to ask your questions via Teams Q&A functionality. The webinar is recorded and the recording will be available in the coming days. So without any further delay, I give the floor to Marieme. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Marieme.
Véronique. Thank you, Véronique, for this introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining this webinar from. This is the beauty of online gathering, isn't it? I'm joining you from Dakar, Senegal, in West Africa. I am Marieme, the Chief Executive Officer at Pharmalis, a contract research organization. Pharmalis was first set up in London, in the UK, in 2008, and then in 2012 in Senegal, Dakar. The role of a Pharmalis is like other CROs. It is to support sponsors of health research studies in the management of those research projects. We can conduct on behalf of sponsors those projects from A to Z, or we provide them with the services they need. It can be protocol writing, clinical monitoring, medical monitoring, project management, you name it. Since we set up Pharmalis in sub-Saharan Africa, knowing how much the continent was underserved in terms of clinical trials, I committed myself and the entire organization with me to developing, strengthening, and improving the clinical research ecosystem in the region. We got involved in projects which took us to many African countries where we trained master students, ethics committees, regulatory bodies, research sites, and laboratories on the conduct, the management, the surveillance, but also the inspection of clinical trials. We didn't stop there. We launched a training program called Pharmalis Academy of Clinical Research Excellence, PACE. PACE goal is to add job-ready clinical research professionals to the ecosystem. So in that context, it was crucial to develop a community of African scientists and researchers who are passionate about clinical research. That's why CREDO, which stands for Clinical Research Excellence and Development Opportunities, was set up as a non-profit organization. CREDO's mission is to provide the clinical research community with cutting-edge scientific and clinical information. It's a platform for sharing knowledge and experience in health research through expert interviews, articles, webinars, and that are targeted at health and clinical research professionals. We launched the CREDO initiative in 2022 during the celebration of Pharmalis' 10th anniversary or 10th year of operation in sub-Saharan Africa. The inaugural event, titled Clinical Trials in Africa, Impact, Know-how and Perspective, was a hybrid conference hosted within the infectious disease department of the main teaching hospital in Dakar. That event featured distinguished international speakers. So promoting clinical research in Africa has always been my CREDO. Clinical research needs to be conducted also in Africa. And when I say also in Africa, it's because at some point in the past, Africa was almost completely absent from the international clinical research map. But we know that clinical research produces robust data and evidence that are very informative to the people in charge of health policies. Clinical research data also leads to market authorization for new drugs, new vaccine, or other types of health interventions. So the international community is aware of this underrepresentation of Africa in clinical trials, and many important initiatives are ongoing to start filling this gap. It is going to take time, but certainly we will get there. So coming out of this webinar, we intend to continue building our health research community with the expertise that is needed. We need data, we need evidence, but we want quality and excellence. This is why we are organizing these events, so that together we can keep raising the bar for clinical trials in Africa. So thank you for making the time to attend this scientific event about implementation. So what is implementation research? What is it about? What is its value? There are so many questions of this kind that so many people are asking themselves, including me. So I'm sure you will learn a lot from our experts who will shed lights on this topic. I hope that all your questions will be answered. And if not, just look out for the next event. We've got a lot we want to cover. I will stop here and hand over to Dr. Véronique Ropion, who has worked tirelessly to put together this webinar with the collaboration of our outstanding speakers, this panel that you will discover. I also would like to thank those who you will not see, but who behind the scenes have been instrumental in making this event possible. Thank you very much. Véronique, over to you.
Véronique, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Marieme. Sorry, I was muted. And thank you very much for this nice speech. I will just, well, today we have the pleasure to welcome 3 speakers who have a high level of expertise in implementation research. And by order of intervention, you will listen to Professor Piero Olliaro, who is Professor of Infectious Diseases of PAOT, Director of Sciences in the International Severe Acute Respiratory and Emerging Infections Consortium, so ISARIC Pandemic Science Institute, in Newfield Department of Medicine at the University of Oxford in the UK. Professor Olliaro will speak about what we need to consider while designing a clinical trial, highlighting the importance of the holistic approach. Then we will have Professor Christian Burri, Deputy Head of the Department of Medicine, Head of Medicine's Implementation Research Unit in the Swiss Tropical and Public Health Institute in Switzerland. Professor Burri will tell us about challenges in translating efficacy to effectiveness, and also reminding us that implementation research is not limited to low and middle income countries. And last but not least, Professor Ghyslain Mombo-Ngoma, who is the head of the Clinical Operations Department in the Centre de Recherche Médicale de Lambaréné, CERMEL, so Center of Medical Research of Lambaréné, in Gabon. And through a few examples of clinical trials, Professor Mombo-Ngoma will underscore the importance of identifying barriers to implement health interventions appropriately, and will address the pivotal role of communities' engagement. So now I will give the floor to Professor Piero Olliaro for the first presentation. What do we need to consider while designing a clinical trial? So please note that Professor Olliaro have to leave us at 2 p.m. GMT, so a few minutes after the question and answer session on his lecture. So Piero, the floor is yours. Let me just let you appear on the screen and disappear. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the introduction, Véronique, and I must say I quite like the introduction made because it contextualizes the type of presentations and hopefully discussion that we'll be having today. So I just wanted to know whether you are seeing my slide. Is it full screen or not?
Yes, it's full screen. You can go ahead, Piero. Perfect.
Thank you very much. So again, good morning, afternoon, evening to all participants. So I'd like to start with something a bit more general, in a way, a step backward, and look at the entire value chain when it comes to medical innovation, what it is. When there is a new intervention, so where does it start? Where does the story start? It starts with basic discovery research, and then from there will be some leads, and these will be going through non-clinical research, in vitro and animal models, for instance. And then a development candidate will be identified, and that is the one that will be tested in humans through the different phases of the so-called clinical development, phase 1, 2, and 3, and hopefully, all going well, this new product, say, is a new drug, will be registered. Does the story end there? Of course not, because now we need to see how it works in practice. And so both for public health, but also for regulatory purposes, that product will have to undergo what's called post-registration studies. But then there are still other questions. One would be, of course, that the drug is available and there is manufacturing is at scale. We've seen recently examples of products that were not available because there was not enough production for all. But then they must be not only available, they must be affordable. And ultimately, we've got to demonstrate better health outcomes. And all that at some point might just go back and feed it back into more earlier research, because we need a better product or we must refine things and so on and so forth. So the whole thing is a non-linear process, and it's called value chain. And within the value chain, each and every pieces of that, they're important and must be valued. At the center of that are the needs of individuals and the needs of public health, and sometimes they are not exactly the same. And therefore, we need to consider all that when we decide what sort of product we need, not just for a drug company to make money, but for the product to improve patient outcomes and improve public health. All that exists in an area, in a space, and the space is defined by, on the one hand, underneath all that, you have the required capacities and capabilities, and the money to finance that. And when I'm talking about capacity capabilities, it's just as research, but it's also capacity to deliver the product by the health sector. And the other dimension of this space is the environment within which all that occurs, which are the policies and regulations that we have. So complex, but that's the type of world where we are operating. Now, when we now more specifically, we narrow down onto the journey from a potential treatment, this treatment being approved, becoming policy and be used in practice. Where does the evidence for it? It comes from studies, clinical trials. These clinical trials are not the same all along this journey. In order to provide the necessary evidence for a product to be registered, we generally need what's called exploratory trials. And we are going to expand a bit on that, but essentially they answer the question, does the intervention work under some sort of ideal conditions? So they provide evidence about the safety, but the efficacy of an intervention. Then is that enough to inform policy? And the answer is not. We need what is called pragmatic trials, which will answer the question as to whether an intervention works under the real conditions. And this is the effectiveness. And then lastly, you have more downstream. I mean, once this is policy and you see that works under those conditions, how do you better inform practice? And then there's a variation that is implementation trials. And this is not about the intervention per se, but it is about the implementation strategy that is in place. Does it promote the use of evidence-based practice in routine trial, in routine care? And then, of course, there are options kind of in between. Let's go through some definitions in order for all of us to be kind of on the same page and speaking the same language. Efficacy and effectiveness studies, they address different research questions and they use different approaches. Efficacy, again, I'm repeating myself and be saying that all over again, but in order for this to be understood and clear, efficacy is the performance intervention under ideal conditions, controlled circumstances, and the objective, like we said before, is approval, licensure. Effectiveness measures the benefits and harms of that intervention under the real world conditions, routine conditions. So essentially they are aimed at producing, informing strategies and policies, recommendations, for instance. Then you have another element which is different again, and this is efficiency. Is intervention, it answers the question, is the intervention worth its costs to individual and society? We are not going to talk about that, but that's also extremely important. And it does play a huge role when decisions are made. So efficacy, effectiveness is not dichotomous. It's a sort of continuum, although the way you study them may be to some extent mutually exclusive. It's a trade-off. Because effectiveness studies, they seek to increase the generalizability of the findings from efficacy studies. So efficacy studies, they are meant to have strong internal validity. We're going to talk about that in a second. Effectiveness studies are built to extend that to be having higher external validity. And another way of describing that is saying that effectiveness is the level of nearness, so how close they are, the actual results of the actual results in real-world conditions of the expected results. So these two elements, efficacy and effectiveness, are continuing. They are complementary. However, sometimes they could be in contradiction. They may not necessarily agree with each other. For instance, there would be interventions that work in a selected sample of controlled individuals. That would be the high internal validity situation, but it may not work or not work as well in everyday's practice. Sometimes you might have the opposite. We see the opposite, that intervention that may be low specific effects, but they may generate benefits through context effects. So that's probably less, may not be as common as that, but potentially may happen. So again, the concept of internal versus external validity. The internal validity, how do you achieve it, is through your randomizing patients. You have strict entry criteria, eligibility criteria, exclusion, ways of considering allocation, the blinding, and so on and so forth. As opposed to external validity, which is the generalizability of the findings through working in routine settings, allowing for doctors' and patients' preferences. So the whole thing is a bit of a trade-off, and that's an important thing to consider. So let's take as an example, there's a new drug, and this drug is approved so received marketing authorization. This is based on a body of data, which includes, of course, other things like chemistry, manufacturing, preclinical, non-clinical, and so on and so forth, but also, of course, clinical studies. So what the regulators want to see is that this, say, new drug is safe and effective in controlled conditions. And efficacy here is defined by the applicant, so essentially a pharmaceutical company, as agreed with by the regulatory authority. And what they need to agree is on the outcomes of the study, the endpoints, how big the effect size will be, and so on and so forth. But the question would be, are these benefits that are seen and reported in controlled conditions, are they also relevant in terms of, are they clinically relevant for individuals, for public health, for society, at all these levels? For instance, just to give an example, this is something that we keep saying, particularly recent trend in cancer trials, that drugs get approved because they show an increase in disease-free survival. But that could be just maybe a few weeks. And against that very modest improvement, they charge huge prices. Are these benefits that are statistically significant, are they also clinically significant, and how much would they add to patient quality of life, and so on and so forth. So all these things are to be considered. And then the other question, are these benefits, and how big the benefits are, confirmed in real life? And that's exactly what effectiveness is. And we need implementation research to answer those questions. And like I said before, so are they worthwhile? So there's an element also of efficiency in that. And then there's this additional element in decision making, which is indeed important, is the cost effectiveness and the cost benefits of a given intervention. So just a brief mention of essential questions when you design a clinical trial. Of course, the first one is that why are you doing the study? What's the main purpose? And the absolutely essential clarity required on the so-called PICO questions, so population, intervention, control, and outcome. And how do you build the study design in order to answer those questions? And within that, it is absolutely essential to have clarity about the main outcome measures, so primary and secondary parameters and endpoints, and what the core outcome set would be. And then there are all a series of questions as to how the data will be analyzed in order to detect this treatment difference, what the results are anticipated in the comparator group, and how small a treatment effect you want to see that it would be meaningful. And then that's why you need a statistical analytical plan, sample size calculation, and so forth. I'm not going to spend much time on that, but just a reminder that all that is absolutely paramount, whatever type of study you want to conduct. What should the protocol contain? Again, please refer to the SPIRIT guideline, standard protocol items, recommendations for interventional trial. So the acronym is SPIRIT. Again, I'm not going to spend time just pointing you to the SPIRIT website. That it's very useful to guide you in these decisions. But then the main thing here is the comparison, is how to compare efficacy and effectiveness trials. And going through a series of questions and see how different they are. So the first one would be the question. So does the intervention work under ideal circumstances for efficacy as compared to the real world practice in effectiveness? Then you should look at where the study is being done. So the setting. In efficacy trials, these will be resource intensive compared to real world everyday clinical settings in effectiveness trials. The study population, like I said before, in the efficacy trials are aim at having, they're built around internal validity. So population highly selected, homogeneous, and whole set of entry, exclusion, inclusion criteria, as opposed to being much more heterologous and much more like the everyday practice. So the type of patient you would be seeing in daily practice with as few exclusion criteria as possible. The intervention is strictly enforced and standardized in one case as opposed to being applied with flexibility in effectiveness trial. Ditto for follow-up, that would be much more loose. And clinical trial endpoint, again, its efficacy are explanatory trials, so there would be as objective measures as possible, as opposed to, but not really as opposed to, but whereas in effectiveness trials you will also allow for a more clinically meaningful, patient-orientated type of outcomes if possible. Adherence strictly monitored versus being rather looser. This both by patients and practitioners, so much more what people would normally do, both the health providers and the users would normally do in everyday life. Importantly, I don't know if you heard of different types of patient populations for analysis, but in the effectiveness studies, it would be intent to treat. It means if you're randomized to one arm, whatever happens, even if you don't receive treatment, or you switch, your treatment's been switched from A to B, or you take additional medications, you're still belonging to that population, and you're analyzing this as a whole, as opposed to using more refined and narrower populations. In other cases, it's called modified intent to treat or per protocol. In effectiveness trials, you want to minimize bias and confounders, whereas in effectiveness trials, you want to account for that, because this, again, is something that would be happening in everyday life. And we already talked about the trade-offs, the trade-off between internal and external validity. How to help you do that? There is, again, guidelines from the PRECIS 2 tool. Is about designing trials that are fit for purpose. And there's a whole series of questions. You can go through that and score it, and then put it against a wheel, which is here. So just now going back to the previous one, there are 9 main domains in this one. Eligibility, like I said before, how close or away from user care your patient, the criteria are. Recruitment, particular when you are trying to involve and engage as much as possible with patients. The setting, how different they are from usual care. How you organize the trial. The flexibility in delivery and in adherence, how strict the follow-up is, the primary outcome as well. Is that relevant? Is it clinically relevant? Is it meaningful to patients? And the primary analysis, again, like we said before. So the PRECIS would guide you through these 9 main domains, and then you can put them against that wheel and see how in which conditions are you closer to an efficacy or closer to effectiveness trial. When you do, that's a very useful exercise to do, because then you can go back to the purpose of your study, so what you wanted to do in the first place, and then say, okay, my trial design is or is not fit to answering those questions. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of ways things going in kind of different directions. So the first one is a few years back, and by the way, this is something that took us a few years to complete. We wanted to look at the spectrum representation of the malaria patients that are recruited in therapeutic trials of uncomplicated malaria. And so what we found, that was a few years back, but I don't think things have changed much. We found 176 studies that met the criteria, enrolling more than 157,000 patients with malaria. They were malaria positive when they tested positive, but only a little over 1/3 were enrolled in the studies. So 73% were excluded, and of those of the studies, so only 82% of the studies reported the reasons for exclusions. So we do not know why the patients were excluded. They are not accounted for in about 30% of the in 18% of the studies. Of those studies that did report a reason, 70% of so the 3 main reasons that were accounted for were that the patients didn't have a single infection, a single Plasmodium falciparum infections, so they had mixed infections or other species. The parasite counts were outside the range, and otherwise refuse consent. About 30%, in about 30% of cases, the reason was not accounted for. So you can see that. By the way, this is we were surprised that was the first review of the representativeness of patients enrolled in trials with respect to the population of patients that we've seen in practice. We clearly showed that there's evidence of knowledge gaps in the generalizability of these trials to the general population. And the main reason is it's a bit of a misunderstanding, because the studies follow the WHO protocol designed to detect the PFAS serum failures and resistance, so for very high internal validity, which is absolutely great. But the problem is that they are being used in informed practice despite very low internal validity. So you see that nearly 2/3 of patients who do have malaria, they are not enrolled in the study. So we do not know how they were treated and what happened to them. At the same time, we applied the criteria that the knowledge that is generated from 1/3 of patients also to the remaining 2/3 of patients. So hence, of course, the importance of conducting effectiveness trials to capture the full range of cases and filling the knowledge gaps. And importantly, when you do a clinical trial, report on the trial, do provide accurate reporting of exclusions, follow the consult statement. And the second and last example is a very different example of a sort of end-to-end approach, and this is what the approach that we used in conducting studies for during and to inform the interventions for the elimination program, the visceral leishmaniasis elimination program in the Indian subcontinent. And this had, and again, so we really went through different elements of the value chain. In the first place, what you need, what are the tools that you need, and all the research that was done to generate information about and produce the tools that would be used in terms of identifying the cases, rapid test at the point of contact, treatments that work, in particular single dose amphotericin B, liposomal amphotericin B, and then importantly also how to limit transmission. The second element of the value chain was now the deployment, the implementation research. So we had those tools and the research that had been done, including the efficacy trials, efficacy and safety trials that have been done to generate that information. So then the implementation research to see how they work in practice for all of them. And importantly, it was the approach that was used, which was to create a partnership to strengthen capacity, to empower the local researchers and the control programs in order for them to increase the stewardship, the local stewardship of the program. So we created, and this was when I was working for TDR, Tropical Disease Research at the World Health Organization. We created a group of representative of researchers and control programs from Bangladesh, India, Nepal, which generated research questions. They tested them, they developed the intervention, they tested them, they applied them, and then when applied, we monitored the effects and then saying, does it work, does it not, what are the problems are, and you circle back when that's not enough. So to finish up, so again, we're going back to what we were saying before, the value of the chain, the individual chain links of the value chain, and they must take into account and bring in all the entire ecosystem, the entire health innovation ecosystem, from of course upstream research, people, communities, governments, decision makers, the clinical researchers, the health providers, between the private and the public sector, and all together, so we'll be able to join all the links and have a value chain that works and that provides the interventions that we need, and that in such a way that they are available and affordable, and they improve patient outcomes. With that, I am done, and thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Piero, for your intervention. Thank you very much. I will just make appear the other experts, Christian and Ghyslain, for the discussion. So let me just, yes. So they may have, of course, questions on your presentation. I have one question first, which is the distinction of studies into explanatory, pragmatic, and implementation a strict one, or are there overlaps and intermediates? Thank you.
That's a jolly good question. Put me on the spot, and I'm sure that Christian has his own opinion, and Ghyslain as well. Again, so I think we should not be too bogged down and straitjacketed by definitions. It's a continuum as far as I'm concerned, and I personally find the PRESIS tool useful for people and ourselves to reflect on where we stand from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum. So, like I said, it's a trade-off. There are things, choices that you can make and choices that you can't make because they are imposed upon you by the environment situation, the tools you've got, you don't have. And so it will be kind of sort of in between. You can design the study, of course, in order to be more in one direction or more in another direction. But the first and foremost is your question, what you're starting with. So what's your question, and therefore what's the best trial design that will help you answer that question?
What Ghyslain or Christian, do you have comments on that, or do you want to give a feedback? Or
no, I will actually do something during my intervention, but I have a question to Piero. It's actually not a question to Piero, but an offer to Piero to quickly explain something more. When actually do you think that implementation research should start in an R&D process?
Right. Okay. So I have, so my views may not be shared by many, but essentially it's as soon as possible. So I honestly think that a lot of, so developing, say, a new drug takes a lot of time for a number of reasons. So some of the reasons are also methodological. I think we could shorten developing, when it say developing a new drug. So beyond developing a new drug, so it's not just registering the drug, but also making the drug available and seeing how it works when it is used in practice. You can compress many steps. You can compress the process by also acquiring elements about the implementation, so how it works in real life conditions. And I think I've also been discussing with the colleagues, and maybe this is something that worth discussing more. How can you transition within a single study, transition from more strict conditions to looser conditions in order to acquire that sort of elements? But starting early. I mean, the phase 3 studies so-called phase 3 studies, which are studies that are meant to have very strong internal validity, how you can transition the process so that you gradually you're loosening the inclusion criteria, for instance, and the outcome measures in order to reflect more.
I couldn't agree more. In the development of sleeping sickness drugs quite some time ago now, there was actually an interesting intermediate, which we call phase 3 2B. That's field studies, implementation field studies that were run while actually the authorities were reviewing the dossier, which usually takes 1.5 to 2 years. And that's a pretty good time point to actually start running field trials. You can't do massive programs in that time, but you already can really contribute to effectiveness knowledge.
Yep.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to comment, Ghyslain, before we go to the next intervention. Would you like to add something?
Thank you, Véronique, and hello, everyone. No, I actually, I think that Christian already touched something that's, yeah, I had in mind, and I totally agree with both of them. With I think actually implementation, not really have a kind of separation of the period when we do the clinical trial and then implementation afterwards. This is normally what is traditionally, but it will be good that already, even from the very early phases, that we can have already some aspects of implementation that allows already to see how we, and but I can maybe further comment that as well when I present. Thank you.
Of course, of course. So Piero and the three of us, thank you very much. We will now come to the second presentation. Thank you, Piero, and I say to you goodbye because I know that you have to leave very soon. So let me disappear and make you disappear too.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So Ghyslain, and please, Christian, I will leave the floor and give it to you. Just a second. The floor is yours. Thank you. You are muted, Christian. You're still muted.
I'm not talking to myself. No, what I said, I will just try to share my slides. That's what I'm doing now. Is that visible?
It is. It is. Yes.
Okay.
You.
Perfect. Then there we go. First of all, I would like to thank you very much for this kind invitation, for this great opportunity to speak on a very important topic. Those who know me will know I have been a clinical trialist for 20 years and only became implementation researcher about 8 years ago. So I made the way actually from the lab into clinical trials into implementation research. And that's why I think I can add to what Piero already very diligently laid out. I would like to start actually with two definitions that underpin what Piero already has been saying. Wikipedia says implementation research is a systematic study of methods that support the application of research findings and other evidence-based knowledge into policy and practice. So implementation research is really to bring things to the patients, into the practice. And TDR takes a little bit a different approach. Implementation research is the systematic approach to understanding and addressing barriers to effective and quality implementation of health intervention strategies and policies. So basically that goes behind. Even already if you have a strategy and policy, there may be obstacles and there may be challenges that we are hitting. And I think these two definitions together describe relatively well what we are actually trying to do. And if I explain implementation research to my neighbors, to people and also to politicians, that's what I used to say. I think implementation research is to find out why we have excellent drugs against malaria and still over 500,000 dead babies every year. And this is really the point. So going back to the development, R&D, and implementation research, to this timeline, this translational continuum. First of all, we do a lot of research in the labs, in animals, etc. And then we have this first valley of tears, the valley of death, before anything can go into clinical science. It's usually a funding valley. If you go to biotechs, they go to venture capital. If you go to scientists, we try to go to big foundations, to national funders. A very, very challenging time point to actually translate. And then we work 5-7 years on clinical science, where we establish, on one hand, tolerability and safety, and on the other hand, the efficacy under very controlled conditions of a new tool, a new intervention. And then again, we have a valley. On one hand, because we need to have the data in a quality that allows to go to regulators, which is very often a challenge, particularly for academics. And only pharma companies nowadays really can manage to, or some PDPs can manage to have this quality. And then there is a long way into clinical practice. And I would like first to illustrate a little bit why this is a long way and what we have to consider, because there are so many factors in implementation that we have to look about. And you can see this time from the very idea of innovation into the application is a very, very long one. And I think the right thinking, and that's why I was asking the question to Piero, the right thinking about implementation, about the access, should really start here, should start latest in phase 2, not only in phase 3. So at the very end, we can do the right things. I have an example that I brought along today, and this is rectal artesunate. You will hear more later about a true implementation study. And rectal artesunate is one of these cases. It's very logical if you think about that the proposition of suppositories to actually protect the young children or the patient on the way to the referral center in case of suspected severe malaria is a good idea. Suppositories can also be applied if somebody is no longer in good shape, if somebody is not able to swallow. So it's logical, but it took about 20 years from the first idea through 17 clinical trials, amongst a huge one that I will actually come back to, until we in 2018 had the breakthrough, the breakthrough we thought it was a full breakthrough when 2 rectal artesunate products were approved by WHO in terms of quality. So what are factors actually influencing adherence? And this goes well beyond the access. I don't talk today about the procurement, about the supply chain, about finances, but more about the patient-related factors and the soft factors. On one hand, we have the socioeconomic factors. Who is actually taking care of buying drugs, of making sure that the family members go to hospital? We have a cost factor, of course, particularly in very low-income countries. Very, very small costs can create already a very, very high burden. And we know that over 50% of the families affected by tuberculosis actually are ruined after treatment. Then we have psychological factors. Many of the diseases, particularly infectious diseases, but also long-term diseases, are stigmatized. People are ashamed to seek help. They're marginalized. Disease conceptions may actually not be very, very incorrect until today in several populations. The malaria concept is not really understood. Physical or mental disability may actually disguide decision-making. And also lack of knowledge about disease and treatment together with the disease misconceptions may play a role. Then we have treatment-related factors. Are the schedules simple? Is it a single dose treatment? Is it a single per day treatment? Or do you have very complex schedules, even maybe changing schedules? Severity of adverse reactions is a major thing. And I come back to that on one of the next slides. And then the environment. Is it easy to get supply? We all know that in middle and particularly in low-income settings, stockouts are a daily business, are a daily event, and this is not helpful if we talk about adherence and compliance. The receiving by a health facility, paternalism, even in our society, my parents, even not even the grandparents, they just believed what doctor said, and if the doctor was rude, that was just the way it was, and also family support. You said, Véronique, in the intro that also will link to the north, the global north. Yes, we also have translating problems from efficacy to effectiveness in the north. Beta blockers are the example of choice as a pharmacist. Only 45% of people who were surviving 1 year a myocardial infection were actually fully adherent to taking the drugs. The authors of that paper say the reason is unclear, communication, understanding, and it's pretty clear. Beta blockers have quite unpleasant adverse drug reactions. So people know basically from their doctor that they will live longer if they take them, but they feel worse. So the objective gain is standing in contrast with the subjective gain. And this is something that is not very helpful. Diabetes type 2, only less than 2/3 of the patients were actually adherent to a diet, fruits, vegetable, high fiber. So we see here that it's very difficult to actually change habits of patients. And then antidepressants, a population which already is difficult to approach, a population that already is suffering from problems with itself. 50% of these people discontinue antidepressant therapy within 6 months of initiation. And 40% reported non-adherence in a paper. So there is a problem of follow-up, there's a problem of support, there is a problem about adverse events as well. And this is not only a global south problem, that's a global north problem. And this is one of the things we have to think of when we start actually the drug development or an intervention development. Same with vaccines. Vaccines have a very long tradition, and on that slide you can see progresses, and on the bottom things that are actually adverse. And measles vaccine has been developed in the 60s and has then seen a massive increase in use in the 70s, and thereafter there's kind of a struggle also in Switzerland to achieve the necessary very high vaccination coverage, because there's continuous malinformation, publication, for instance, of this very famous publication about suggesting that MMR vaccine is linked to autism, which has then been withdrawn, but this information still is circulating. So human factor and human beliefs, not the fact, the human beliefs is something that we have to take into account in translating efficacy to effectiveness. And now going back into the global south, these are 4 pictures from the study that I will then present and use as an example why it may be very difficult to translate from clinical trials into reality. These are pictures taken from in the Caramal study in the DR Congo, and this is about access. If you look at the road to the bottom of the left, endless roads, and this is the way a mother has to walk with the child when going to a referral center. So this decision to actually go there in very low income settings is a difficult one. Then to find what you see on the right hand side, which is not an optimal setting. Another thought is and the problem I see in the thinking and the translation from efficacy to effectiveness is that we, and also still to a certain extent our students, are taught this linear connection from home to the community health worker or the primary healthcare center to the referral center and then back home again. That's the theory. In practice, this is not exactly the case. That's not what is happening. And already this slide shows that people can go directly from one to the other place and jumping, for instance, a primary healthcare center, or go directly from home to the referral facility. This is not something that will happen in a clinical trial. In a clinical trial, you have a very, very clear pathway. You make sure the patients do what they're foreseen. And to make things worse, we have pharmacies, we have private clinics. So people going from home directly to a referral center, people going to a private clinic, and from there to anywhere, or from anywhere to a private clinic. People first may be going into pharmacy, and from there to somewhere else. And on that picture, not shown yet, we have also the traditional healers. We have the traditional people in that game. So the public health system is much more complicated and much more complex than actually it is standing in the textbooks. And this is one of the major differences between a clinical trial and an effectiveness trial, an implementation study. I would like to use an example, and this is again rectal artesunate. In the late 2000s, there was a huge, massive clinical trial that was conducted in Bangladesh, Ghana, and Tanzania, with almost 17,000 or over 17,000 participants. What is striking here, and this is very important, and this is very normal for a clinical trial, is that the referral completion actually from the primary healthcare center to the referral facility was very high. And the overall mortality in that trial was between 2.5% and 3%, very low. And what the authors found out is that the risk of death and disability in children below 6 years taking longer than 6 hours, that means in a very restricted population, was actually reduced. There was a reduction by, in average, 50% of the death risk in lower than 6 years, taking longer than 6 hours, not in the other populations. That's a clinical trial. And this actually corroborated a WHO recommendation that if intramuscular injections of artesunates are not available, children below 6 years should be treated with a single rectal dose of artesunate. The use of rectal artesunate still was very moderate, and this had the case, as I already pointed out on an earlier slide. The reason is that there was no quality assured product around. In 2015, MMV made a big initiative, and eventually in 2018, 2 products were pre-qualified. And then UNICEF actually planned a massive rollout in several countries. And that's where this Caramal study, community access to rectal artesunate against malaria, was coming in place. A big consortium under the Clinton Health Access Initiative. The lead for research on the Swiss TPH, together with partners in Uganda, the Makerere University, Agena Associates in Nigeria, and Eco Santé Publique in the Congo. UNICEF, who was responsible for rollout, and MMV and WHO, who gave support, technical support and advice and funding from UNIDAID. And what we did is a classical implementation observation study across the whole chain, the continuum of care from the caregiver into the community health worker or primary health care center to the referral center, and then back home. We made a huge effort in that study to actually visit all the children 28 days after treatment in their homes. And that's one of the pictures you saw before, the people on that shady bridge with the motorcycles. So along this, we collected data through a patient surveillance system in all the points of contact. We did health provider surveys, household surveys. We did a costing. We looked into drug resistance. So we had a pretty comprehensive program that was actually driven by the rollout. That's why we don't have a 50-50 distribution of the patients pre and post, because we just had to follow what was happening. And what also happened in the same time is actually the COVID pandemic in 2020. We enrolled in total about 13,700 participants, not in an ideal scenario as per WHO guideline, because there were a lot of mistakes, there were a lot of deviations that were happening. And along this continuum and in this complex system, in a nutshell, that's the resume of 15 publications. We had a referral completion between 48 and 67% in the 3 countries, Nigeria, DRC, and Uganda. Very different outcomes in these 3 countries. Uganda has a relatively well-functioning health system, and everybody in average is in a hospital or in a referral center in 15 minutes, which is by far not the case in DRC and Nigeria. The correct dosing was also very variable between the countries, was between 30% and almost 100%. Was worse in over 3 years olds, because there 2 suppositories have to be given, which rarely happens. And then a scary thing is the treatment completion between 0 and 77%. That means only a fraction of the patients actually got the artemisinin combination therapy that should be given after rectal artesunate, after injectable artesunate, to complete the treatment. So we have a huge deviation here and a huge discrepancy to what we actually have in a clinical trial. In a clinical trial, we had 90% plus referral completion. We certainly would have a 100% or near 100% treatment completion. And what we found is no increased chance of survival after rectal artesunate. Actually, we had a odds ratio that was actually positive. Particularly in Nigeria, we had actually an increase of fatality and not a decrease. So that shows that clinical trials, yes, they're very important. Otherwise, a product cannot be registered. But we then have to really see in reality what is going on. And one of the research questions that we were asking was, are there any unintended consequences of scaled up implementation? And yes, there is one. Referral actually is going down. Referral is not completed because the children get better through the suppositories. And one of the other research questions we are asking was, what are the minimal requirements of a community case management system? And this starts then with good diagnosis, with a competent referral decision, but also with availability of drugs in the referral place. So in summary and conclusion for this rectal artesunate case is, it was shown in an RCT to reduce deaths, but we could not actually confirm this. And what we found is rectal artesunate is really just one part of the continuum of care for severe malaria. And without a functioning continuum, theoretically very very good intervention is actually not really functioning. So in those areas where we had hoped to have the best and the most prominent impact, we didn't find this impact. In contrary, we actually found a negative impact. So there's a big discrepancy between efficacy and effectiveness, which is not product related, but health systems related. And this is the conclusion I would like to make. If we think with clinical trials, we are at the end. We are by far not at the end, and that's why implementation research is very, very important to understand the circumstances, to understand what people need, what people want, to understand the real life conditions, the human factor, the beliefs, etc. And with this, I would like to stop here and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you very much. It was really very interesting. Of course, you can, once again, you can ask your question via the Q&A functionality. First, we have a question. It could be for you, Christian, but of course, Ghyslain can comment, and it's unfortunately, Piero is not here anymore. So the question is, what are the differences between implementation research and operational research?
I'm silent because I'm not well known to be good in semantics.
Okay.
I'm more on the practical side. I really would like to have somebody else who is more into semantics respond to this.
Okay.
From my point of view, but that's the really gut feeling. That's not an informed response. Operational research is more about processes. It is more about, you know, what is happening technically. And the implementation research to me is more also including, would be a larger term, is more including also the human aspects and all the understanding of social beliefs, values, etc. I stand to be corrected.
Okay. Ghyslain, you would like to add something?
I can't tell more than Christian.
Okay, so I think I just checking, but I think that we have no more questions on this on your presentation, Christian. So it was very, very clear and visual. So thank you very much for all this. I think that we will jump now to the last intervention with the intervention of Ghyslain. So Ghyslain, I give you the floor. Thank you very much, Christian. And I disappear.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Véronique. Just give me a second to have my presentation.
Besoin d'aide, Ghyslain, ça va aller?
It's okay. It's okay. Maybe can you just... Okay, my presentation can be seen. Let me quickly put it in presentation mode. Okay,
Great.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Perfect.
Okay, so thanks to CREDO Families for the opportunity of discussing this, and it is actually a great pleasure to share the stage with Christian and Piero. And after what they've already presented, I'm going to actually give a few examples as well in our setting in Gabon at CERMEL. In our setting at CERMEL in Gabon. So let me quickly put you familiar with how I want it to be. I will give a few definitions, and of course then my examples will be the first about some malaria chemo prevention studies that we've done here and the outcomes, and then about one study, the Cantampiramax. And then I will discuss a little bit the strategies after the lessons learned from these different studies, the strategies that we are applying at CERMEL and BNITM. Just for the definitions, I've taken this from the Global Health Network, one of the courses on clinical research. Normally, we have treatments and health management practices that exist, but then we need from observations to see how we can improve them because they don't work like 100% perfectly. And wherever it is needed, we need actually new interventions to be developed, and that can be drugs, that can be vaccines. So for that, yes, these can be drugs and vaccines, and we need as well to learn more from some specific diseases. This is like the example when COVID came or anything else like that. to better understand how to manage and treat them. Ultimately, the aim is to understand how, with clinical trials, clinical research, we can improve the health outcomes. On the other hand, I was interested, I've taken now the AE overview about implementation research. What it says is that implementation research is a scientific method that studies how to apply research findings and evidence-based knowledge into policies and practices. This actually helps to identify the what, why, how interventions work in real world settings where cultural context and other factors can impact the success of interventions, how to monitor and evaluate interventions to improve their outcomes. This is actually what has been already presented by my two colleagues. There are a lot of examples that can be taken. Now I've chosen to be in this framework of WHO recommended chemo preventions. Normally, we have here let's take it as populations, 4 main populations. We have pregnant women on one hand, where there is the IPTP, which is the intermittent preventive treatment of malaria during prevention, which is applied for them. I will go through details in the next slides. We have what we call now the PMC, the perineal malaria chemo prevention, that used to be called the IPTI, and there is the IPT for the school children. There is the seasonal malaria and so on. But anyway, with all these chemo preventions, normally these are recommended by WHO. IPTP is the one which is, we can say, already implemented, but of course, there are some limitations or some fears, like the SP that is used has always been thought for a long time to be a failed drug or a drug that is facing resistance, and for that we needed some alternatives. And we did this study, the malaria in pregnancy preventive alternative drugs trial. And this study, we did it actually in HIV positive women and HIV negative women. For the HIV negative women, we did it in Gabon, Benin, Kenya, and Mozambique and Tanzania. And for HIV positive women, we did it in Mozambique, Tanzania, and Kenya. We were trying to see whether mefloquine could be the alternative. So I will quickly jump to the conclusion. At the end, mefloquine showed actually very poor tolerability, although it was actually very good in, let's say, preventing the malaria itself, malaria parasitemia, in peripheral blood, but as well in the placenta in the mothers. But as I've said already, the tolerability was very poor because a lot of women vomited, but as well, a lot of women actually reported dizziness. And the outcome that we chose as well for that study was actually the low birth weight. And at the end, we observed that there was no difference in terms of low birth weight in the mefloquine group compared to the SP group. At the end, actually, mefloquine was not recommended as an alternative to replace SP. As I mentioned, that we did a study at the same time in the HIV positive women with mefloquine, but then afterwards we did the MAMA study as well. That was in HIV positive women, but at that time we were using dihydroartemisinin and piperaquine, because dihydroartemisinin piperaquine has been actually shown to be effective in terms of as an IPTP in HIV negative women. And then as HIV positive women have the issue that when they're already taking cotrimoxazole, they should not be taking SP, we needed as well to look at it. And recently there is this Cochrane review that actually has combined these the results from the mefloquine, but as well then from the MAMA study, our study, but there was as well the IMPROVE study that was done by the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. And the implications, as it is shown here, was that mefloquine and the hydroartemisinin and piperacin with daily cotrimoxazole have been evaluated in clinical trials for the prevention of malaria among HIV-positive pregnant women. Meta-analysis showed them to be efficacious in preventing malaria. However, one of the drugs, mefloquine, was associated with increased risk of HIV mother-to-child transmission and poor drug tolerability, which may be barriers to its implementation in practice. This is for mefloquine. The evidence evaluating the hydroartemisinin and piperacin added to daily cotrimoxazole prophylaxis indicates that it reduces the risk of placental malaria in HIV-positive women compared to daily cotrimoxazole prophylaxis alone, and does not seem to increase the risk of adverse events, which may make it an adequate drug for an intermittent preventive regimen for malaria in this population. Maybe when I will sum up at the end, I will actually say again what are my thoughts about this. As I've shown at the beginning, that there are these interventions that are recommended by WHO, and that sometimes there are limitations, and we try to find alternatives. But more importantly, it is as well that as we are doing this clinical research, when we did the MIPAD trial, that was a very large trial, but we think that the context of the trial make it that the external validity, as it was presented by Piero, was not really taken into account here, and we were taking more like the internal validity, and that was a little bit limiting us in generalizing, but I will discuss this again later. I quickly say a few words about another chemo prevention that is actually recommended by WHO since 2022. It is the post-discharge malaria chemo prevention. This is actually there has been three main studies that have shown that there was a study in the Gambia that showed that SP given to children who have been hospitalized for severe anemia at discharge, they are given SP, and then this is given like with a certain periodicity. This actually prevents these children for being readmitted to the hospital after for a certain period. Let's say, I think it was up to 6 months after discharge. And this was as well demonstrated for the other drugs like hydroartemisinin, piperacin, and as well artemether-lumefantrine in the other countries like Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, I think. But then, since this is as well, there was evidence shown from these clinical trials, but this is actually not implemented anywhere. And there are actually barriers that have been identified why this intervention is not implemented. Some of the barriers are listed here, like the funding, a lack of political will from ministries of health to fund this intervention. There are some research gaps actually regarding the optimal duration of the intervention. I mentioned that one of the studies did for 6 months, but then it is not known how long, actually it is not very well understood how long this should be going on. The delivery itself, when I've mentioned IPTP, so for pregnant women, normally this is actually delivered as the women attend the antenatal clinics. But then for those children who have been discharged, it is not clear whether this should involve actually, let's say, community health workers, or whether this should be done at the facility. And this is as well kind of competing with the the other interventions like malaria treatment and so on. So this was it about the few chemo preventions and the clinical trials done, and as well some of the limitations that can come out of it. Another example of the work that's one work that we have done, and which is actually already showing the implication in terms of implementation research, was the Quantum Pyramax trial. This, we call it a real-world safety and effectiveness study. It was a study conducted in Côte d'Ivoire, Gabon, Cameroon, RDC, and Congo-Brazzaville. And in that study, we wanted actually to see the safety, but particularly the hepatic events related to Pyramax, and as well when it is given like repeatedly. This study was designed to be very simple. That means in real conditions, how practitioners would diagnose malaria. Most of the time it is with a rapid diagnostic test, and then or microscopy whenever it is available. And then patients are treated, and most of the time patients are prescribed a medicine that they go to take at their place, and then that's it. But we had like a follow-up at day 7 and then a follow-up at day 28. As Piero mentioned, actually the efficacy and the effectiveness here, because the drug administration was not directly observed, except the first dose, but all the other doses were not directly observed. So this was really an effectiveness study. But as we were interested by the safety, and here we call it really a real world, because we've tried to put it in normal settings as it happens in practice. And from this study, actually this allowed at the end, or this contributed at the end for the Pyramax to be recommended as well by WHO in as the ACTs for the treatment of malaria. And Pyramax is the most recent ACT that has been recommended by WHO. Still around that's project something, and this is actually what I want to start introducing, the lessons that we've learned in our setting. So was in that study that we've called a real world study, or real life, we've actually had community health workers that were involved, so to assess real world effectiveness and safety of antimalarial pyronardine artesunate in that population. The follow-up was primarily conducted by not conducted by medical staff, but by trained community health workers. So this was a very good perspective for us and for all the sites involved. And there was this publication. And from these lessons learned, we have then set something at CERMEL. For me, I'm actually a professor at the Bernard Institute of Tropical Medicine in Hamburg in Germany. And the section I sit in is actually the implementation research section. And there we do have actually different working groups, including the health communication, the health economics, and many other social sciences groups. And this is because from the different experience we believe, and this is, I think, one of the first questions from Christian to Piero, we believe that it will be actually more effective to have implementation already considered at very early stages while we are conducting clinical trials. And for that as well, in the context when we want to understand why maybe some medicines, particularly for malaria, we do have a lot of effective medicines. Why they are not really very well implemented, accessible, or available, or just used even when they are there. It's maybe because there are a lot of considerations, and some of these considerations that we try to take into account in our context is actually in building the capacity of research in sub-Saharan Africa, and for that, we believe that as the communities become familiar with research that is done in their setting, they tend to accept actually the results of the research rather than something that is coming from elsewhere. And for that, besides of course, with the capacity, we need to put the infrastructure, we need to have the equipment, we need people to be trained, and this is what we are working on in our network, in our framework. This is actually with in mind the aim of improving the implementation. And for that, this is the few slides that I will be showing. It's just like we've set up some satellite sites, and in this network of satellite sites, we have actually a health and demographic surveillance system. I was interested when I saw the presentation from Christian. There was actually something with the patient surveillance system that they've established during their study. And this is as well something that one can say is actually lacking in the health system in Africa, that we don't have a system of surveillance. And this is what we are setting up in Gabon. And that allows us to have actually an idea of the burden of the disease in these places, and the local needs are identified. At the same time, then, when we have identified this, we come with clinical trials as we conduct these clinical trials so they can address local needs. And this is already coming with kind of community engagement and stakeholders' commitment. So I'm going to finish my presentation just with presenting a little bit of this capacity building that I've mentioned. In one of our sites that we call is called Sindara. We've built this, and we have the equipment, and of course we have the staff that is being continuously trained, and our health and demographic system that makes that with drones. We've mapped the area, and then we can have like the demographic data, male, female, and the different age groups. And that the same we do in another village in 4+, where we've built as well something. We do have a team working there permanently. And then when we're doing clinical trials, we do have this health and demographic surveillance system. And this makes that people adhere more to the results, and that makes that the implementation at the end, as we mentioned already during the talks of my colleagues, is already introduced very early in the process, and we believe that this at the end will make that all the drugs that are effective, people have more trust and confidence in them. But as well, it's not only a matter of drugs and trust and confidence, it is as well a matter of a lot of people like the environment. It's not just the patients, but the health practitioners that themselves, they have more knowledge about these interventions, and that's it. So yeah, with this, I acknowledge again Pharmalis and CREDO, and of course my institutions, BNITM, UKAE, and CERMEL. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ghyslain, for your presentation. Yes, we have a very complete kind of a very complete visual of implementation research. So thank you to both of you, and of course to Piero. We have many questions. The first questions for Ghyslain is what is the role of authorities, in this case the National Malaria Control Program, in implementation research, and how may they best be involved in a study?
Okay, thank you, Véronique. Yeah, this is a very interesting question. And actually, This comes to what I've mentioned, like the commitment of stakeholders. To be honest, myself, I will describe myself as Christian said, like I've been doing and I'm still doing clinical research, so clinical trials. But then I was most of the time struck by the fact that these interventions are not, maybe the word is not working, but at the end, sometimes I just wonder, I ask the question to myself, why should I continue to do clinical trials when we don't actually make an optimal use of the existing interventions? But then I look around, I see what is the role of the PNLP, as we call it here in Gabon, the Programme National de Lutte contre le Paludisme. But then I observe it is, maybe there are a lot of factors. First, it is the funding and the expectations as well. Maybe, I don't know whether these are governmental expectations, whether these are population expectations, but things are not very well described in terms of objectives. And I know that their partners are the WHO and UNICEF and others. So it is something that is complex for me. But what I can just say is, as a perspective, I hope that with the context, the framework that we are building, we will be bringing them to be more committed with them setting up common objectives, so that with these objectives, we can see how things progress.
Okay. Christian,
I don't know
would you
whether
like
Christian wants. Yes, please.
Well, it's a tricky one, you know, because without the regulators, or actually these national programs, nothing works, and sometimes with the national programs also nothing works. It's really a tricky one. You know, our approach in the countries we work, and I know that you have been are very, very deeply rooted also in the Gabon. I think that's something that helps. Is that very, very early on we actually try to discuss with the national program what our intentions are, and try to pick up their opinion. And it's really very often then, of course, coming down also to the persons. It's coming down to who is.
I think we've lost Christian.
Yeah, I don't know.
Christian, yes, you were frozen. Do you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Not see you, but hear you.
Yeah, somehow my camera just decided to not cooperate. So anyway, it's something about people. It's like in implementation research as such. It's really, sometimes people understand, and you have very knowledgeable directors, and sometimes not. But I think it's a very good idea to involve them from the very first place. Ghyslain?
Maybe I can add on this. Yeah, thank you very much, Christian. I can add on this because I've mentioned at the beginning, like there is maybe the funding, the availability of some funding from for the national malaria programs. But then what we've done now, or what we're doing in Gabon, we know that people normally in general, they are committed, politically as well, committed. So what we've done is, like, we've signed now conventions with the National Malaria Program. And with these conventions, actually, let's say MOUs, it is that we are running the sentinel sites. And that makes that we can actually be providing data in terms of prevalence of the different diseases. And this is why I've shown you now that we have this network of satellite sites. Of course, this is, we have the privilege of having some funding, and then so we have that network. And at the end, we have data, and then the data is made available for the national programs. And now we're trying to see as well interventions that are really cheap and not very much sophisticated. Let's say, I can quickly say, we're trying to see, I won't say the name of the drugs, but we're trying to repurpose like the existing drugs and how they can be with really a very simple scheme. And we do our own initiated clinical trials when they provide good results. So we discuss them with the National Malaria Program, whether they don't want to promote that. Still, we will be the one looking for funds. But then if they are committed and we go together, this allows to implement actually these interventions in the country.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question for both of you. First, hi, big thanks to the presenters. And the question is about Egypt. Egypt recently had been declared malaria-free by WHO, and congratulations to Egypt. What can be learned from Egypt's fight against malaria, and what can serve other countries with a higher prevalence of malaria, what they have to implement to get free of this disease? What do you think about that? So first, Christian, maybe, and then Ghyslain.
Okay, there's two things. One is Egypt is a completely different setting than sub-Saharan Africa in terms of finance, in terms of economy. That's one part. Second, also in terms of surface, because Egypt is huge, but in Egypt malaria is very, very much restricted to the Nile Valley, as far as I know. And this is, of course, making the job very much easier than in other places. So that's one part of it. And the other part is, and I can with this also just address another very interesting question that has been asked. And this was the request that we have only 2% of clinical trials in Africa, how the CRO can increase the percentage. And this goes exactly in the same also for malaria control and malaria elimination. One of the main things that we as researchers can do little about is stability and actually the efforts to make things work. And this goes for a malaria program. You know, if you have a continuity and you have people working there for a while, I see that in the country I work most, and that's the DR Congo. We just lost our director again of the malaria program, replaced by a new director. I have not met the person yet. Maybe he is super competent, maybe he is not super competent, but there's always a disruption, and this is created by politics. And with each of these changes, you basically start from scratch. You start from reintroducing programs, and it's really not efficient. We see a little bit the same in big pharma companies where you have a huge turnover, except that the big pharma companies have the financial power to just survive that and push other people into it and competent people. If it doesn't work, you just replace again. And the African countries which already struggle, they simply don't have that power. So stability and support. I was attending a meeting last Friday, 250-person conference in Bern celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Human Research Act, the Human Research legislation. And one of the 4 key goals of this new legislation is to support Switzerland as a platform for running clinical research. So everything is done that things become easier, that they become simpler, that they are supported. And this goes to the ethics committees, and this goes to the drug regulatory authorities, which have the task and the mandate not to block things, but to make things happen. On one hand, they have to regulate, they have to make sure participants are protected, clinical trials are run within the limits, but besides of that, they have to make sure, or beyond that, they have to make sure things happen and that the review is done in 2-3 weeks and not in 3, 4, 6 months, and that people know what they can expect. And this is going together again with the situation in malaria control. If a country can't do things alone because there's limited resources. At least the country can provide stability and can provide a certain welcomeness and a stability in the processes. And this is to me, after 35 years working in sub-Saharan Africa, is the main key to success and to progress.
Thank you, Ghyslain. Ghyslain, please.
Yeah, I can actually just echo to what Christian has just said about being consistent with the programs. And a few years ago, I think there was a country in Latin America that was as well declared malaria-free. And when I went to observe actually what were the factors, there are several factors that can be the parasites, the mosquitoes and stuff like that. But the stability is one of the main of them, because you will see programs that were set already like during the 30s. When I say the 30s, like the years 30s or the years 60s, the years 80s, these are the programs that are bringing actually the countries to be malaria-free. So countries need to be very consistent and constant with this. Otherwise, this doesn't work.
Thank you, Ghyslain. Another question for both of you. Do comorbidities affect the effectiveness of implementation trials in Africa, especially in malaria trials? Ghyslain, would you like to begin?
Yeah, I can start with this. I don't fully see what the question means about the comorbidities, but in general, what we can say here is, of course, that if we see the different phases when we're doing clinical trials, of course, like the early phases, we are trying to exclude people with comorbidities, but then when starting like from the phase 3 and over, normally we do have the different morbidities that are combined. And I would say that most of the drugs for malaria, I don't see any kind of contraindication, a major contraindication that is there. Like, let's say someone with diabetes or with hypertension will not be taking the drug. And if one sees the main population that is targeted for malaria, we have actually very young children. So most of the time, young children don't have comorbidities. And for pregnant women, although women have been, pregnant women particularly have been excluded for a lot of clinical trials, but at the end, there are lots of interventions on antimalarial drugs that are actually done for pregnant women. To make it short, no, I don't think that comorbidities is a main issue in terms of implementation.
Thank you, Ghyslain. Christian, would you like to add something? You are muted.
Sorry, we should know after 7 years. I was very much in line with Ghyslain until to the last sentence. When you summarized, I don't see any issue in implementation research. Then for me, the word in malaria is lacking, because if you look into TB, if you look into HIV, if you look into warmy world, then the problems start, with drug interactions, etc. For malaria, I very much agree with you, and so far we just have been lucky with the malaria drugs. But there's other indications where actually the problems to start and any single disease that is added is actually becoming a challenge.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, after I finished talking, I just realized that yes, any malaria in malaria was actually lacking. Thank you for adding this.
Okay. I have another question. There's many questions. Would you recommend genotype stratification and adapting treatment doses in implementation trials in malaria?
Can you say that again?
Would you recommend genotype stratification and adapting treatment doses in implementation trials in malaria? Does it inspire you?
I quickly go first. I would say a clear no, and because this is scientifically a very interesting question, but the question was in implementation trials, and in implementation this is absolutely impossible in the settings we are talking about, and so it doesn't add. It maybe adds to knowledge, but that's then research and not implementation research. So yes. From my side, a very clear no.
Yeah, nothing to add.
Okay, perfect. I have also, what is the meaning of it? Oh, yes. Another question is, as an example of how community engagement is being done, do you have examples of that, the role of community implements?
Okay, I start on that one. Actually, just to say that's something that I've learned when we've been doing the two studies on pregnant women that I've presented, when we did like the first one, the MIPAD study, and I mentioned that we did, I think, we were very strict with our protocol and stuff like that, and we think that this was more like with internal validity. And at some point, when we did the study in HIV, myself, I learned a lot, because we had then what we call the community advisory board first. And then this was already like people from the community, we had discussions, and then they were telling us their different perspectives, their different views of the disease, but as well their needs, their expectations. This I learned. I learned a lot. So this is already one step in terms of community engagement. Actually, whenever we do a large trial, it's good to have maybe a formative phase when we can discuss with at the same time stakeholders, but as well with the communities. And then I imagine that there are several ways then how then one can further engage the communities. The other study where we had like the community health workers, this is as well, at least from my experience, something that was good, because these are people living in these communities and so on. And although we didn't have meetings, but these people that were living in these communities were already interacting a lot with the communities. This is what I can comment here.
Christian, would you like to add something? There's many questions around this pivotal role of community engagement and how they can help in implementation research. So please.
Yes, sorry, it's a very hot topic in Europe, and also very much debated here. So it's not restricted to Africa. In Africa, we have a little bit of different setting, because the societies tend to be very hierarchical. So in any case, if you're on any study, you have to talk to communities and the communities you work with, and with this, inevitably, in positive terms, you will get the feedback if you ask the right questions. If you do not just go there and tell them, we are doing this and this and that. If you're actually asking the questions, so you much more naturally have an interaction in Africa. In Europe, we more and more have these the patient organizations. The value sometimes very high, sometimes not so high, sometimes more a debating club. Depends a little bit on the indication and of the disease. Malaria is potentially a fatal disease, so the interest is very high. And in Europe, it's more about cancer. It's more about also rare diseases.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I have a last question, because I think that we have you have answered pretty all the questions. A last one, do you think there is a disconnect between the trial outcome on the field and decision makers that impact the effectiveness of drugs?
Challenging one. Huh?
I don't know who would like to
begin. From my point of view, no. Actually, if they, decision makers, we have try to think like a decision makers. We are also, I think the four on the screen are also decision makers. And what do? We use the information we have at hand, and then try to make the best out of it. So it really depends on what is fed into the system, and that's why I think implementation research is so super important, and should also be requested by the decision makers to actually be able to make informed decisions. What is the impact of something, and what is the real world cost, and what is the real world outcome? To come back to rectal artesunate, when we designed the rectal artesunate, the Caramel study, our sample size calculation was based on a positive outcome. Of course, we expected the thing to work, and it didn't. And if you start there, you can have surprises. And then, of course, WHO stepped in and spread a word of caution. And then the hell broke loose. You can go into the publications in the Lancet and in BMC. We had a lot of flack because we had negative results, and unexpected negative results. So it's not actually the decision makers at the level of the national programs or the drug regulatory authorities, but it may be also the researchers who are not really willing to accept results. And that's why I think robust implementation studies are very important. Ghyslain.
Yeah, I can just add to what you've been saying. That's of course there are a lot of workshops on protocol development and maybe many technical aspects, but with the outcomes definition, this is, I think, something that makes that a lot of studies are kind of limited at some point. I will just take the example of some of the studies that we've been doing with pregnant women. When it comes to the outcome or the endpoint, when we are targeting low birth weights, but maybe this is not any more sensitive. And just to say that we can be designing very well things, but the results of studies can be challenging as well. And this is what makes, at the end, as well, the implementation challenging. But yeah, I cannot tell more than what Christian has already very well said.
Thank you very much, both of you, Marieme too, of course. I'm awfully sorry, but we have a time to respect, and we come to an end. So I really apologize for those who wanted to ask more questions, but we will ask hopefully in another event. So I would like, before leaving, I would like to thank you all to have participated. Thank you very, very much to have participated so actively and so many in this webinar. Thank you to our experts, of course, for their exciting and enriching presentation. And last but not least, thank you to the organizers, of course, with special thanks to Marieme, Milena, and Clément for their unwavering support, especially over these last weeks. We were very busy. So once again, thank you very much. Goodbye and take care to all. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Véronique. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.